As for Richard, he was off somewhere constructing a hammock for himself in the trees. Timothy, as usual, was the only one who remembered the horses, and I saw him brushing them down while I began to make my bed. I was just spreading my blankets out, concentrating on getting the corners smooth and perpendicular, when something crashed on the ground beside my knuckles. I jumped and fell backwards, too startled at first to recognize what had just hit the ground, not 4 inches from me. Only then I saw the shiny, polished wood and bronze hinges. It was the broken box I had hidden in the stump, and standing nigh beside it were Timothy's boots. I looked up at him, slack-jawed. From this angle he looked dangerously tall. "You found it." "Obviously." "But how? You didn't know where to look." He crouched down beside me. Even in his position, he was still taller. "I knew exactly where to look. You told me it was in a hollow stump by the river." "But there are hundreds of stumps by the river. How did you know which one?" "I followed your footprints." I wrinkled my nose. What had I been thinking? Who else in these mountains wore designer sneakers? Composing myself, I started to smooth out my blanket all over again. "Well, good for you. You found the seal, and now you can take me home." He didn't move. He didn't say a word. I looked up. "Well?" The box was empty. I feigned surprise. "Really? I guess you got there too late. Someone else obviously found it first and left the box." He sat down on the ground beside me and rested his arm on his upturned knee. "Why is it that you can be such a good liar one minute and such a lousy liar the next?" I frowned. "Who says I'm lying?" "I do." For such a simple statement, it was surprisingly hard for me to come up with a reply. I finished straightening the blanket while I composed my thoughts. After a moment, I said, "I'm not telling you where the seal is. You stole it, and that was wrong. Very, very wrong." "I don't expect you to understand. I don't even expect you to trust me. But I will make a bargain with you. If you tell me where the seal is, I'll give you the money that your uncle needs to pay his taxes." I froze. "Do we have a deal?" "How dare you?" I said in a choked voice. He must have been expecting a different answer because his expression was raw confusion. "What?" "How dare you even try to do that? Why, if you gave me the money, I'd either have to marry you to save face or spend the rest of my life trying to pay you back. Of all the rotten, mean things to say to me, who cares if you're a thief? I still thought you were a gentleman." You would have thought I'd just hit him from the look on his face. "I didn't mean anything like that. It's an honest trade." "Honest? You want to try to blackmail me into—" "It's not blackmail." "Blackmail me into giving you a stolen item so that I can save my family's home. Why, you repulsive man, get out of my sight." "Not so easy. If you don't want the money, then what do you want?" "I want to get home before Clay's." "Then I'll get you home. Just tell me where the seal is, and we can leave this very night." "I don't need you anymore," I said. "Redcliffe will get me home." "Not necessarily." "What do you mean?" "I mean that I had to buy his services today." "Buy?" "I told him that if he helped me to free you and the others, I'd give his parents a cottage on my father's land, rent-free." "You mean he didn't help us out of the kindness of his heart?" "No. I'm sure he was glad of the opportunity to run Oswald off his land. But if I hadn't offered a home for his parents, you'd be back in his camp again, waiting for your uncle to send ransom money." I turned to look where Redcliffe had crashed under a tarp. All I could see were his fancy boots sticking out from the side. "But what he said about my father, I thought he meant it." "He was drunk. Maybe he meant what he was saying, but I can guarantee you he wouldn't have given us the royal treatment if I hadn't paid for it." I breathed hard through my nose. "Fine. I'll just follow the river home. It might take me a couple of extra days, but I can make it. I shouldn't run into any more trouble with robbers if I stay away from the road." "Or," he said, "you tell me where the seal is, and Redcliffe and I will get you home in 2 days' time." "No, I can't do it. I won't. It's not yours." "You're going to get awfully hungry without any food." "I'll eat berries." "And what about the wild animals?" I felt my blood start to run hot. "I'm telling your father on you. The first thing I do, no, the second thing I do when I get home after seeing my Aunt Esme, is to go to your house and tell your father what a wicked, horrible, cruel son he has. If he doesn't disown you after the things I tell him, I'll eat my hat." He stood up and took 2 violent steps one way and then 2 more steps in the opposite direction. He raised his hands to his head and then threw them down. "Why are you so stubborn? Why did you become a thief?" He stopped to think, and his face lit up with an idea. "What if I promised not to steal any more? What if I swore to you that I would give the seal to Prince Henrik himself? Would you give the seal to me then?" "I wouldn't believe you." I pulled the cover of my bed onto my shoulders and lay down. For several moments, the silence of the night settled over us. "Lisbette," he said quietly, "have I ever lied to you before?" I listened to my own breathing for several moments. "No." "Then will you trust me this one last time?" I sat up. "You promise that you'll give the seal to the prince himself?" "I swear it." "When?" "When?" "Yes, when? I have to know when you actually mean to give it to him in the near future." "As soon as you are home, I will go and find that prince and put the seal in his hands." "Why not just hand it over to George?" No, I promise only to give it to Prince Henrik. I studied him. Fine, I'll tell you where the seal is. He knelt down beside me as if his legs had lost their strength. You will? Yes, as soon as you get me home. Then I'll tell you where it is. His face fell. Why wait? Why make me come all the way back here when I could find it now, tonight? It will take me 4 days to get back here, and by then, anyone might have found it. I'll tell you why, because you still want it so badly. You say you're going to give it back, but if that's true, why are you still so desperate to find it? He thought for a moment, then instead of answering my question, he asked me one more of his own. Can you promise me that it's safe enough to leave alone until I can get back here? Yes, that is something I can guarantee. He was dubious. I don't know. You were pretty surprised that I found the box. How can I be sure you left the seal in a safer, less obvious place? I didn't like what he was inferring. Timothy, where that seal is now, even a man as smart as you couldn't find it. That is all I'm going to say. Now, good night. I intend to get an early start tomorrow. I lay down once more, and to my relief, he didn't try to talk to me any more that night. I heard the sounds of his boots trudging away, and I wondered if he was heading to bed, or if he might actually go back and try to look for the seal. Well, good for him if he did go, I thought hotly. He wasn't going to find it. Who cared if he found the box? Whoop-de-doo. The box was worthless, I knew that. But if he went back looking for the seal tonight, he'd come back empty-handed. I wasn't lying about how well I'd hid it this time. No, I'd left no evidence behind where I'd hidden the seal into its final hiding place. I slept that night more soundly than I had since I left my bedroom at Mrs. Haverden's boarding house. At the first hint of a bird twilling the advent of morning, I opened my eyes, remembering where I was, and immediately got out of bed. Enough time had been wasted, in my opinion, and I, for one, was ready to get out of these mountains. It was still dark, but if the birds were up, that was good enough for me. I found some water and washed, then making as much noise as I could, I went about looking for some food. I even knocked over a pile of pans, just in case anyone was sleeping too deeply. One by one, Ben's people began to climb out of their beds and make their way over to the fire. No one returned my smiles or good morning. Redcliffe crawled out of his tent and shouted, "Who's making all that racket?" Then he clutched his head and groaned. "Daylight's burning," I said, rustling through the food stores, hoping to find oatcakes. "Daylight," he whined, "it's still the middle of the night." It took a firm hand, but I got us all off before the last star in the sky disappeared. Redcliffe and half a dozen of his men were going to escort us down the mountain to make sure we didn't run into any more trouble with robbers. As we mounted our horses, I studied Timothy, looking for signs of weariness. But if he had spent the night looking for the seal, he was hiding it well. This was not to say that he was cheerful. From his horse he greeted me with a curt nod, and then rode to the head of the line to be with Redcliffe. Richard settled at the back of the line, and since I had little desire to ride too closely to either of them, I chose a spot somewhere in the middle. It was an uneventful day. We spotted some gold miners by a stream, but other than that, we seemed to have the forest to ourselves. It gave me plenty of time to think. I thought about Timothy and why he had changed his mind about being a thief. I thought about what Marissa was doing back in Ottleton, and if she would go in for hair extensions before she made the trip back home. I thought about ice cream chock full of raspberries and chocolate, and then I thought about birthday cakes, and that made me smile. But the one thing I did not think about was Aunt Esme. I had a vague idea in the back of my mind that my visit with her was going to cost me something. But thinking about it I knew wasn't going to do any good. It would only make me worry, and I didn't like to worry. So I stopped thinking about Aunt Esme and sang instead to pass the time. When at last we stopped for the evening, I felt that we had made good progress. By tomorrow afternoon we'd be out of the hills and in sight of Easton. Already the woods were giving way to meadows and beech trees. As soon as we reached camp, I busied myself with taking care of my horse and even volunteered to gather firewood.